QUORUM Radio, baby.
You're listening to QUORUM Radio.
QUORUM Radio now on with Jim Jenkins. James Curtis Jenkins was born in 1942, and after he enlisted in the United States Navy, he became a Navy hospital corpsman and won a place in the School of Laboratory Sciences and Blood Banking at the National Naval Medical School of Bethesda, Maryland. He attended classes during the day and stood duty every fourth night in the Bethesda morgue, assisting the pathology residents performing autopsies. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, his body was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital for autopsy. Along with fellow students Paul K. O'Connor, Jenkins was assigned to assist doctors Joseph Humes, Thornton Boswell, and Dr. Pierre Fink in the autopsy of JFK. After leaving the Navy, he obtained an undergrad degree from the University of Mississippi in Science and Biology. He continued his graduate studies in pathology, anatomy, and immunology, receiving a Master's of Combined Clinical Science from the University of Mississippi Medical School in Jackson, Mississippi. Jim Jenkins later taught in the School of Allied Health Sciences at Southwest Texas and San Marcos, Texas. He moved to the University of South Alabama Medical Center, where he served as supervisor of the hematology laboratory and taught as an adjunct professor of the Allied School of Health Sciences, teaching hematology and flow cytometry. Jim Jenkins retired from the university in 2010. He's author of the book, At the Cold Shoulder of History, the chilling story of a 21-year-old naval hospital corpsman who stood at the shoulder of JFK during the Bethesda autopsy. Again, as I said, he's the last surviving member of the JFK autopsy team. Jim, it's great to have you on QUORUM Radio. How are you today?
I'm fine.
That's great. Well, listen, I wanted to kind of jump into this. Recreate, if you can, for us that day, November 22nd. What do you remember about that day when you woke up? Anything?
Not much. When I woke up, I was just on my way to Bethesda for school, and really was kind of a normal day up until about 3:30, I guess. When we were told that actually I was in the class, we had a break, and Bill Lynch, who was one of the fellow students, had gone out to get something to drink, a soda or something, came back and told us that the president had been shot in Dallas. We kind of, didn't really think too much of it. Everybody was laughing, talking about it. Not talking about that, but they were laughing at Bill because Bill was kind of a jokester. And then the instructor came in and said that class was dismissed, that the president had been shot in Dallas, and that he had died from his injuries. And he told the duty crew, which was myself and Paul, that we were to report to the morgue and prepare for an autopsy in the event that the president's body was sent to us. We joined a first-class hospital corpsman who was the non-commissioned officer of the day for the laboratory, and we went to the morgue. Paul and I started preparing for the morgue, preparing the morgue for an autopsy, which is what we normally did. We started labeling specimen jars and setting up the instrument trays and that type of stuff. And we had chosen the next autopsy number in the autopsy log. We were using that as to label the jars along with the president's name. And then we were told that we actually were going to get the president's body. And then we were told we were not to log it in to the log, and that we were to remove the labels from the jars and then use only the autopsy number that we had.
Wow.
And so we went through that procedure again, which was it was kind of extensive. And at that point in time, we just pretty much waited, and then the body came in, was brought into the morgue by a group of people in suits, and I think there may have been a couple of high-ranking military people with them, usually flag officer rank, which would be admiral or general. And I was a little taken back by the fact is that the appearance of the casket that they brought in, it was basically a shipping casket. And the casket was brought in, placed on the floor. And Paul went over to help remove the body from the casket. I didn't go over. I was at the table, the autopsy table. There were too many people over there to begin with, and it was a small space. So they took the body out of the casket, laid it on the table in front of me. The body was wrapped in sheets. The body and the head were wrapped separately. We after they put the body on the table, Dr. Boswell thanked everybody for their help and asked them to leave. And they left the morgue. Dr. Boswell told Paul and I to keep the door locked, and he left the morgue for about 15, 20 minutes, I guess. And then I just assumed he was going upstairs to the laboratory in order to talk with Dr. Humes to, kind of work out their plan for doing the autopsy. And
Right.
yeah.
So I was going to ask you a quick
After about
question,
20,
Jim.
sure.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, you go right ahead, Jim.
No, I basically after about 15, 20 minutes, Dr. Boswell came back. He was alone. He gave me a clipboard that had what we called a face sheet on it, which was actually a sheet for weights and organ weights, body weights, distinguishing scars, wounds, things of that nature.
Yes, sir.
Basically, it was used to locate those. Dr. Boswell and I unwrapped the body. We didn't unwrap the head. And we started doing the face sheet. He would dictate to me or tell me where to place the scars and that we found and so forth, and possible wounds, that type of thing. And then as we were finishing that up, Dr. Humes came in, and Dr. Humes had 4 flag officers with him. As he came into the morgue proper, I have to understand that there were actually 2 rooms there. The entranceway from the hallway was a double door into an anteroom where the coal boxes for the bodies were. And that was a small room there where the log and the basically tags that we used to tag the bodies were. And then you came into the morgue proper where the autopsy tables and so forth were.
Jim, I want to ask you a question. Excuse me, before we continue. Just getting back to the whole matter of, when the casket was brought in, how many feet away were you from there, between yourself and the casket?
I was across the table from at the head of the table, and the casket was placed on the floor on the opposite side from me at the foot of that table, and that's where the body was taken out.
Sure. So you're saying like maybe how many feet?
Uh, I would say the table was probably 6.5, 7 feet long. So I was probably no more than 8 feet,
Wow. And did me a favor,
maybe
just
maybe closer.
okay.
Pardon?
Just yeah. Well, just a couple of questions about the casket. What color
Sure.
was it?
It was kind of a. That's not a. It's probably not a fair question to ask me. I'm red green colorblind, but
All right.
it was a typical shipping casket that you see. You've seen them on television when they were bringing bodies home. It was kind of a, I want to say, maybe a bronze silver type thing, or not really bronze, but brown silver thing. It was a plain casket, very plain, as they all
Right.
are. And I was a little surprised that the president's body would come in a casket like that because, he was the president of the United States. And
Of course. So absolutely. So wow. So then people brought him in. I think you said Dr. Boswell left temporarily about 15 minutes, right?
yes, there wasn't anything. I mean, I wasn't surprised at that. Again, like I said, normally when we had an autopsy, the residents would have the history, the medical history. So, sometimes they would read it before they came to the morgue, and the coroner would start the autopsy and do the preliminaries. But and so like I said, I assumed that maybe that's what they were doing, preparing for the autopsy, which would have not been abnormal
Sure.
or
And at that
unusual.
time, okay. So while I guess you were with Paul O'Connor at that time, while you were waiting for,
Yeah, Paul and I were as far as I remember, Paul and I were the only two in the morgue
at
at
that
that
moment.
time. Now, I think the first class had left. He was in and out a lot that night.
Sure.
Uh,
Question I have for you is that you brought the body in, it was completely wrapped in sheets, right?
right.
Okay. At that point, did you begin to conduct the preliminaries, or were you waiting for the physicians to return to initiate the autopsy?
No, we didn't. We were told not to unwrap the body.
Okay, so
Dr.
you're there
Boswell
standing
told
by.
us not to yeah.
Okay, so you might just curious. I mean, how did you guys feel at that time? I mean, what was going through your minds? Were you stunned?
Well, no, not really. I mean, it was unusual and, a little tense. And the fact is that, it was the president we were doing it on, and that we were also doing the autopsy with, Dr. Humes and Dr. Fink and Dr. Boswell. Dr. Humes was the commanding officer for the laboratory and pathology, and Dr. Boswell was basically, I guess, under Dr. Stover, which would have been my commanding officer. So, and then Dr. Fink was I believe he was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and then of course Paul and I were just HM3s,
I
so
mean,
we were the lowest ranked person in the totem pole down there, and
okay, those guys get a
so
lot of
we,
work and a lot of experience. So just curious, Dr. Pierre Fink, um, he was with the U.S. Army, wasn't he?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
would you
Pierre,
repeat?
yes, sir. Dr. Pierre Fink, he was with the U.S. Army or the
Yeah, he
Pentagon?
was he was from AFIP, Armed Forces Institute of Pathology downtown.
Right.
When I asked who he was, they told me that he was an expert on battlefield wounds. Is what they told me. I later found out
Right.
he was a forensic pathologist.
Great. Okay. Sounds like the Navy wanted to get some more, somebody who's a specialist on hand to be able to, who had a lot of experience, I guess, looking at traumatic injuries and bullet-induced injuries. So great. So all right, from that point on, then Doctors Humes, Boswell, and Fink came back, I guess. Then how did things begin? Tell us about it.
Well, we did. I mean, again, like I said, as Dr. Boswell and I started doing the face, or did the face sheet, and then Dr. Humes came in with the officers. The officers went into the gallery, and Dr. Humes came to the table, and he and Dr. Fink started unwrapping the head and, examining that. When the head was unwrapped, Dr. Humes directed the medical photographer in taking the pictures that he wanted, the photographs that he wanted of the head. And then we did x-rays. I helped Gerald Custer, who was the x-ray tech, do the first set of x-rays. Basically, all I did was place the cassettes and then, help position the body.
Right.
And that was, and then everybody had left the room except for us and the doctors. Gerald took the x-rays up to x-ray to develop, because in those days, they were developed in tanks. And
Sure.
He brought them back, and they were, they were looked at, and we found no bullet fragments, no large pieces of metal anywhere. There were a few trace element pathways, but not really. They really weren't that prominent. And so the individuals that were in the gallery, which were, like I said, I only knew one of those, which was Admiral Galloway, and I don't know who the others were.
Right.
I was told at the time that the one that was kept directing the autopsy was Dr. Berkeley, but I've later found that Dr. Berkeley was actually the individual that was running from upstairs in the presidential suite from Bobby Kennedy down to the morgue, directing what could be done in the morgue as far as what they were being allowed to do by Bobby Kennedy. And that again is something that I just recently found out. The head was examined, and I was standing at the right shoulder. Dr. Fink was standing at my left shoulder, and Dr. Humes was at his left shoulder, and Dr. Boswell was directly across the table from me. And they examined the head, and they were examining the head, and I was paying close attention to what they were saying and so forth, because if they asked me for something, then I needed to make sure that I heard what they were saying. And they first, after they took the photographs, so forth, they first started examining the head, and the right side of the head was very malleable. You could kind of move it around with your hands, or mold it with your hands. But they found a wound on the right temple that was above the ear and slightly forward to the ear, almost right inside the hairline. And Dr. Fink, you had to move the hair around to see it, but it had the borders of it were gray, or they were graying. color, and Dr. Fink had made the statement that maybe that was caused by a bullet. And then while they were examining that, Dr. Humes got called back over to the gallery and talked to the individual again, and then he came back and he told Dr. Fink that they needed to let that go and get on the major or the large wound in the back of the head.
Sure. Let me ask you a question. Excuse me, Jim, just a quick interjection. How many people were in the gallery, roughly? How many people were in the gallery watching?
I have no idea. The only people that I remember in the gallery were the 4 people that were directly in front of me.
Sure.
I know there were people in and out. There were other people in the gallery. I don't have any idea how many, but there were, I would say there were quite a few, maybe.
Sure.
I don't really know.
The question I want to ask you is that when you first saw the body, what was the first thing you noticed?
Well, when I first saw the body after I unwrapped it, it was, I didn't see a lot of, damage because I was only looking at the body proper. I could see the wound in the throat, and that later we were told not to bother with that because it was just an emergency tracheotomy, and so we didn't examine it. And when the head was unwrapped, you couldn't tell much about the wound in the back. It was, you could tell there was some bone and tissue missing, but the head was, the hair and so forth was so matted, and it was matted, stuck together and so forth by blood and serum. And it looked like quite a mess. But once the scalp was reflected back from the skull, you could tell, the borders, the limitations of the wound, how large the wound was, which is something you couldn't tell before that.
Right. So the question I want to ask you is that, we've seen so many photos. People are confused about what really happened, what the wounds consisted of. There's a photo, it's pretty famous, supposedly of JFK's head, and it shows towards the back around the cowlick, there's a wound about the size of a pencil, number 2 pencil. I mean, I don't know, I'm estimating. And it looked like there was some fracturing there. I mean, describe the wound in the back of the head, Jim.
Well, the wound in the back of the head was kind of, I guess, it's kind of a contradictory thing, but it was a kind of a rectangular trapezoid. It kind of started at the top, which was pretty much the widest portion of it, but it was rounded, a little concave at the top, came down, and it had about, it had a fracture at the bottom right that kind of went off to the right like a tail, and then it had fractures radiating from the focal points on the wound, where the bone was missing itself. It radiated kind of off to the left at the top and right, and another couple of other things where the wound was, where the bone is missing, it was jagged. It was, it was about, I guess, 6-7 centimeters long from top to bottom, maybe 5-6 centimeters wide. I say it was about about 3.5-4 inches from top to bottom, maybe 3 inches wide, 2.5,
Right.
3 inches wide.
Right. So that particular photo that one sees, it showed a gloved hand, and to the right, towards the front, ahead of the right ear, towards the temple, there was I guess a skull flap. And
Oh yeah, that was
what do you think is that photo?
that was
What's your
that was. I didn't see that flap. I suspected that flap was made whenever Dr. Humes. See, when we first saw it, there was an incision. I'm saying incision, but a kind of a tear from the top right of the wound to the almost actually a little past the coronal suture, almost to the frontal bone. Now,
right?
that was the tissue, and it looked as if there were multiple tears in the tissue that had been connected surgically. When I say surgically, the connection to those were very smooth, as if they had been cut, and that was over a fracture. There were two major fractures lines in the skull, one kind of high and then one lower above the ear in that area. And that kind of followed that fracture, not perfectly, but anyway. When the skull was reflected back, or when the scalp was reflected back, some of the bone that was being held together by the scalp and so forth had fallen into the cavity, cranial.
Yeah.
But
Right.
those photographs,
Recreations. What do you think?
I think that's the Fox photographs. There's a lot of things wrong with those photographs, and there's a photograph in there with they call the death stare. Well, that wasn't the case. When the head was unwrapped, the left eye was closed, the right eye was slightly open. I mean, it just a fraction of the lid was up, and that we never saw that photograph. I've talked to people a lot of times about that. The other thing that they have is they have some photographs of the head with the hair and scalp hanging, and if you look closely to it, you'll see that that triangular wound there. If you could look close to it, you'll see there's some scalp that's laid over to the left. If you're looking from behind the body or behind the skull, and then the most striking thing of that is if you see the brain tissue there, the brain tissue is normal. It's not, it doesn't look like there's any. As a matter of fact, that looks like the brain tissue is absolutely normal. You can see the convolutions of the brain and that type of thing. And when you traumatize brain has a large amount of liquid in it, and it kind of gels. So that one's not good. There are other photographs there that have a metal headrest holding the head up. I did autopsies in that lab for 14 months, and we never used it. And none of the other students who did autopsies either ever used it.
So
We didn't even know it
interesting.
existed. And
Wow.
so I really don't even know if the table would accept something like that. And then,
Amazing.
there are other anomalies there. The phone on the wall, wasn't there. It was over by the deep sink, partially into the little hallway, and it was memorable because it had a curly Q cord on it that would reach all over the morgue, and we were
Right.
always getting tripped up by that cord. It was
Right. So you
always on
didn't
the
see
floor.
that. You didn't see that.
No. And then there's also another one where it shows something that's sitting against the wall that looks like it may be a box. I guess it possibly could be an X-ray machine, but it's not clear that you can see that. So I'm not sure that all those photographs were taken in the morgue. I couldn't vouch for that.
Okay. All right. So basically, it's too bad we can't, because of the computer problems, we couldn't get you with a video stream. But so the wound in the back of the head, there was a wound in the back of the head, right?
Yes, in the parietal occipital area.
Right, which is kind of the parietal occipital. Occipital is the back of the head, the bottom, the base of the skull, right?
Yeah, it's not totally at the base of the skull, but it was. The parietal is if you go to the center of the skull, parietal bones are on the right and left side of the skull, and in the back there's kind of a U-shaped bone there that's the occipital. And my tongue's tied.
Occipital.
Occipital.
All right. Okay. Great. So then, basically, and because it's kind of like it extends around one area to another, I think. But but basically, in the back of the head, the wound in the back of the head was about the size of your fist, depending upon how big the fist is, of course.
Well, like I said, it's according to how you look at your fist.
Right.
Right. It wasn't a huge round wound like that.
Right.
That you could put your fist into or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
It was more of an area, like I said, about roughly 4 foot long and 2.5, 3 foot. 4 inches long and 2.5 inches wide.
Right. Sure. Okay.
That was the wound. That was where the bone and scalp were missing.
Right. Right. So okay. So now you've seen the Zapruder film, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I did. I have a copy of both of them.
Okay. What you saw in the Zapruder film, is that consistent with the head trauma that you saw at Bethesda Naval Hospital and the morgue room for the autopsy?
Yeah, the trauma, basically, the trauma to the head was extensive because the whole right side of the head was fractured, and and the bone was being held together by the scalp.
Wow.
As I said, you could take your hand and move the right side of the head around. As a matter of fact, when Dr. Humes took the brain out, all he did was make a coronal suture, which is from the top of the head downward toward the neck. He described it as being from the top of the head down to the middle of the ear.
Right.
That was forward of it almost, and that's kind of where the flap was. And the flap that you described would have would have kind of obliterated that incision he made.
Right.
And then
Sure.
the way the brain was removed, it already had the incision and the fractures at the top of it they ran from the back of the head forward. So all they did was lay that part of the skull over and remove the brain.
Right. Sure. So then, the description that I heard, I think William Matson Law gave me, who has done a lot of work with you and Hugh Clark, was that the JFK's head was like a sort of like a hard-boiled egg that had fallen on the floor, where it was
Well,
being
yes,
held,
it was. Yeah,
sort of like it was being held together by the membrane, the
right.
egg. But I mean, of course, that was the scalp,
Yeah,
sort of, and so it was just basically, I mean, one tremendous wound, sort of. I mean, just like tremendous fracturing. Could you see that there was a lot of like blood loss through, let's say, like compound fractures in the cranium? Would you say, is that possible? Or
well,
that,
I know that the brain, there was tissue missing from the brain. The brain had some anomalies too that I noticed at the time, but I didn't really have that much medical experience and knowledge at that point in time, but I did notice that the brain that Dr. Humes removed from the cranium, when he removed it, he gave it to Dr. Boswell, and Dr. Boswell motioned for me, and we went over, and I knelt down on the floor, which is where the brain bucket was, and Dr. Boswell gave me the brain. I turned it upside down, put it in the sling over the bucket to put the infusion needles in, and there was a lot of things. I noticed that when the brain was given to Dr. Boswell, that the convolutions of the brain were smooth, and they were kind of a pale color, and they seemed to be wider than normally the brains that we took at autopsy. And then it also, the damage to the brain, the missing tissue in the brain didn't seem to fit very well with the damage in the back of the head. Seems like it would have been more extensive. And I might also say that when supposedly the official weight on that brain was 1,500 grams, that's 200 grams more than a normal brain, or the average normal brain. So,
sure.
but we then when I took the brain, I turned it upside down, and what we normally did at Bethesda, we infused the brain. We had needles that came down from a carboy of formalin, and we insert those into the severed internal carotids at the basal arteries at the bottom of the brain, and let it infuse during the rest of the autopsy. Then we would take it out and drop it into that bucket of formalin, put a lid on it, and they would let it sit for usually till Monday, the following Monday, when they did brain conference or supplemental autopsies, as they called them.
And by the way, did that happen, Jim? Was the brain kept in that bucket with the formalin for a Monday conference to examine?
Well, there's evidence that there were actually two brain conferences. There's evidence that there was one Tuesday, I guess, afterwards. And because there was one where Dr. Boswell and Dr. Humes attended, and then Stringer, who was the photographer, civilian photographer, he attended that one. And then there was one later where Dr. Fink attended. And then there was a photographer attended that one with Dr. Boswell, Dr. Humes, and Dr. Fink, but that photographer was never named. And I know when Mr. Stringer did his deposition, for the House Select Committee, he said that he actually that they did coronal sections of the brain, which means they actually slice the brain from in sections from front to back, and that he took those sections, put them on a viewing plate, and took photographs of them. But Dr. Humes later testified that what he did was they didn't do those sections for the brain out of respect for the family wanting to add the brain to the casket. All of that is, all of that's kind of a missing. That's not really something. I mean, you can tell that. I mean, those two autopsies were done, but you can't really get any definitive evidence of that. And the statements that are made about the brain they really don't make sense. Supposedly, Dr. Humes said that he gave the brain to Admiral Berkeley, who was the physician, the president's physician, to be buried with the president's body. But that first supplemental autopsy, which was the brain, didn't occur until after the burial on Monday.
Sure.
And then the other one was later on. And then some of the other things that don't make sense is that Dr. Humes says that he put the brain in Captain Stover's, locked it in his closet, but he doesn't say when he did that. And then, the first autopsy was done, about 72 hours. So that would have had to have been the one that was infused, because if it had just been dropped in the bucket, you wouldn't have been able to do that supplemental autopsy for about 6 days. And there's a lot of questions about that part of the supplemental. So, but again, too, is I really can't attest to that. I can just look at at what the brain would have been like, if it was infused, and what it wouldn't be. I do know that the brain that we took at autopsy did not correlate with the official autopsy description of the trauma to the brain.
Right. Okay, Jim, let me ask you a question. Do you think I want to ask you also about what appeared to be a bullet pathway in the front of the president's head, but before we do that, I want to get your impression on something. Did you have a sense that things were being rushed and weren't being carefully examined, and the things just weren't done with thoroughness?
Oh, I think, the examinations were thorough, and I know that the body autopsy that I did or helped with Dr. Boswell, assisted Dr. Boswell, and was a normal, thorough autopsy of the body cavity, of the body proper. The only thing we didn't do was we didn't take the spinal cord, which we normally would have done, but probably there wasn't any reason to do that. Sure. I know there was a big reluctance on the family to allow us to do a complete body autopsy. But since
Right.
we weren't able to find any major fragments, Dr. Fink was concerned about, the bullets being somewhere in the body. So,
Right. And so, in other words, I guess at the conclusion of that autopsy on the president's body, Dr. Pierre Fink felt that they hadn't really made a complete assessment and determination if there were additional fragments in the body.
well, no, what happened was that during the X-rays were repeated 3 times. And the last time Dr. Eversole, who was a radiologist, directed them, and they never found any major metal fragments in the in the body itself, or in the head itself. And that was a big point of contention with the 4 officers that were in the gallery, and between them and the pathologist.
Was there back and forth?
That was what. Pardon?
Was there some back and forth that they were commenting, or did you get any of that?
Well,
Hear any of that?
I didn't hear. I couldn't hear any of the conversation between Dr. Humes and the individual that kept calling him back over to the gallery to talk with him. And
Right. Right. All right. Let me ask you a question before we get to the back wound. So tell us about what the physician saw in the front of JFK's head. That supposedly there might have been something that could have looked like a bullet path, that a bullet had entered his head. Tell us about that. Or was it like conjecture? They weren't quite sure, or what was it?
I have no idea. There's a photograph. It looks like there's a V in the right forehead. That's but I think my personal feeling, I didn't see that, and I think that may have been part of the incision that was used to take the brain out. The face, the face was not. There was a slight bruise in the right temple close to the eye, but the face looked normal. I mean, there was no damage to the face, and that I saw. Well, there's none there.
Sure. So Jim, I want to ask you about the. I'm just curious. I mean, I assume that when the body was brought into Bethesda, it had not been washed.
No, it wasn't. I mean, the head would still had matted blood and hair and so forth, and the wrappings of the head. Actually, what was happening when Dr. Humes was unwrapping the head was wrapped in 2 layers, pretty much. It had a sheet wrapped around it, and then there was something that I thought might have been a towel that was wrapped under that, and then when you started taking that off, it had adhered to the head and so forth by because of the dried blood and serum and so forth. And at that time, the wound gaped open, but it was basically along that incision that I described earlier. It went back to where it normally was.
All right. So in other words, I mean, the question I want to ask you is that, was there gray matter all over the president's head and mixed in with blood and serum and all over his hair, or where was it concentrated?
It was concentrated in the back, in the back of his head.
Right. That's where you saw.
Pretty much from. Yeah, pretty much from behind the ear to the back of his head. Now there was blood. His hair, he had a lot of hair, and the hair had become saturated with blood, and over a period of time, the blood had clotted, and the serum had formed, and it had matted the hair and stuck it together, and so forth.
Right. Did you have, by the way, did you see, was there any kind of a dried pool of blood that accumulated within the sheets or the towels such that you saw like it just had pooled?
Well, the head wound, the wrap, the second wrap that was directly intact with the head was blood soaked.
Yeah. Right. So then, okay. Right. So it just must have been a hellacious mess with just blood all over the place. And
Well, it was, I mean, if you had looked at that, and that would have always seen, you would have thought, well, the back of his head's gone, but that was not the case.
right. So the back of his head was not gone.
No.
Okay. Now, Jim, tell us about the back wound and what happened.
Well, there was actually one back wound and it was actually in his back. It was located between the top of the scapula, which is the shoulder blade back there, and the second or third thoracic vertebra. And it was kind of in between there.
Right. Sure. And then did it make any
yeah, you can locate it. Yeah. The hump in your back is or the nodule in your back there. That's the seventh cervical, and then you can count 1, 2, 3 down from that. That starts the thoracic.
Right.
That'll give you an idea.
Sure. Now, Jim, do you remember when we discussed this before? You said that they tried to find a path to that bullet. Well, tell us what happened.
Well, what they did was they probed it. First of all, Dr. Fink and Dr. Humes were doing that, and then Dr. Boswell had already taken the organs out of the body, and they were on the cutting board and being dissected. And I could see the imprint of the probe that on the inside of the cavity, the pleural cavity. And then, Dr. Fink had said, we need to stop this because we don't want to create a false entryway into the pleural cavity. And so they got another type of probe that had a rounded tip on it, and they used that. And then finally, the probe, it wasn't going anywhere. It was, it was just going down and stopping, and there wasn't any entryway into the pleural cavity. And then Dr. Humes probed it with his little finger, and he could probe the depth of it with his little finger, and it went downward about 25, 30 degree angle toward the feet or the caudal end of the body.
Towards the what?
Well, caudal end. It's the end feet. You're down toward your feet.
Right. Okay. So in other words, it went toward downward. Okay, great. So,
right.
Had rigor mortis set in at all? What you could see?
There was slight rigor mortis and L.M. mortis whenever the body came in. It wasn't, wasn't the type of rigor mortis. I mean, it wasn't as extensive as you would think, where the body couldn't be moved, that type of stuff.
Right.
And once we took the organs out, we had taken the breastplate out, so we had made the body more flexible.
Right.
And then when they were probing it, Dr. Fink was pretty much holding the body up. I mean, he didn't have it sitting all the way up, but they had it up to where they could manage it, the probes and stuff.
But they couldn't
you know,
ascertain, excuse me, they couldn't ascertain an exit
no,
trajectory.
they didn't. They never found an exit, and I think that during that time they were kind of a little puzzled about, you know, where it went, and then someone brought the information that there was a bullet had been found on the gurney and so forth, and so, you know, they just basically assumed that was the bullet there, and it had worked its way out. But
So then, okay. So I guess somebody from Dallas
that was
called.
it. Well, I don't know. That's the big question. I know that he did not make a call while he was in the morgue. And, you know, again, too, Dr. Hume said he didn't make the call until the next morning. Now, see, the other thing that people don't really consider is the fact is that, you know, Dr. Berkeley was in the emergency room in Dallas. And
Right.
so he had all of this information, you know, but I don't know that he shared it I know he didn't share it with them while they were in the morgue, so I don't know if he shared any information with them at all, you know, before the autopsy, before they came
Right.
into the autopsy.
So, and it's an extensive procedure to perform an autopsy. How many hours long did it last, Jim?
Well, we finished the autopsy about 12 o'clock, sometime around midnight, maybe a little before, after.
So based on what,
Pardon?
yeah, I wanted to say, what time, based on, I think what Dennis, was it Dennis Day?
Yeah, then, yeah.
He's,
Okay.
he was the officer of the day, I think, or the person on duty.
He was the NCO. Yeah, he was the NCO for administration.
Right. And so what time was the body's arrival noted as? Didn't they get that? It was pretty accurate, right? What time was it that?
I don't know. I mean, that's something that I need. You know, I took Dennis David's timeline. He says 6:38. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Sure.
I don't know if, you know, I can't say that I know what time the body came in because you know, I didn't see a clock. I didn't even, you know, I didn't have my watch on because I was in scrubs.
I said you had a lot on your mind and a lot to do. You didn't have,
Well, it was pretty, you know, intense for Paul and I because we were charged with paying attention to what the needs of the pathologists were, and
right.
you know, and then the people coming in, and you know, that was our paramount, you know, concern.
Sure.
So I didn't, like I said, I don't know. When I wrote the book, I used Dennis's time frame because I needed a time frame.
Sure.
And his was the best one that was offered because it was collaborated by Sergeant Borgen, who was in charge of the Marine security detail when he filed his after action report to his commanding officer. And then years later, we talked to a Dr. J. Cox, who was the officer of the day for the hospital, not for the, you know, there were two commands there. There was a medical school command, which we were under, and pathology was under. And then there was a separate command, which was the hospital, and had two commanding officers. Dr. Cannon was the captain, he was a captain, was the commanding officer for the hospital, and Dr. Stover, who was also a captain, was the commanding officer for pathology or for the medical school.
Okay. So, you took about, we'll call it roughly 5.5 hours, I
So
guess.
like I said, I can't verify
Sure.
a time that the body came in.
No,
I
sure,
can't
sure,
tell you which one of all of the times that people have given have. I can't, which one's correct. I can't
Of
personally
course, no,
verify that.
that's okay. Not important. So, just curious. You do an autopsy, the organs are removed. Anything that you recall about President Kennedy's body that really stood out, besides the obvious head wound and
Oh well, I mean the wounds from his World War II. I mean, he still had the scars, and he had he had, of course, one of his legs was shorter than the other one. Not noticeably so, but and then he had a normally had a appendix scar. I remember that. He had cut downs on his chest and his ankle. That was basically where they had put body fluids in.
right. Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
As far as the body was concerned, there wasn't anything, wasn't any wounds or anything of that nature. Most of the trauma was mostly head trauma.
Sure. And by the way, did you see his kidneys at all? His adrenal glands? Wasn't there?
Yeah, we removed the kidneys, and there was virtually no no adrenals. They were all wasted, and they just basically were no adrenals.
Wow. So I guess he had, what was that due to? Did they ever talk about that or?
I think he had Addison's disease or one of those diseases. I think it was Addison's disease he had, and he had been, they had been, he'd been on hormones or steroids forever, and
Wow.
that's basically what happens. Is that he had no adrenals.
Amazing.
He probably would not have lived through a second term.
Yeah, he was, it was kind of a secret that they kept closely guarded, that he had a lot of
That
problems.
was, he would have had that before he was elected.
Right, right. So, and just so in concluding, they looked at the organs, nothing special in the organs besides, it's just routine, I guess. Right? So nothing really out of the
Well,
ordinary regarding
other
any
other
trauma.
than that, no, he actually, he had, his lungs were really, really healthy looking. They, in those days, we very rarely saw any pink lungs because everybody smoked. But
Right.
his lungs were nice and pink, and the doctors, I think Dr. Humes asked someone in the gallery, did he smoke? And I remember them saying, well, he smoked occasional cigar. And,
Right.
but other than
Wow.
that,
Okay. He was really healthy in that respect. Okay, good. So then the people from, what is it, Guller's Funeral Home came in? Were you there when the funeral home staff arrived?
yeah, I was there during the time that they did an arterial embalmment and so forth. And, we stood by to help them if they needed it. They really didn't need it. It was three individuals, and all I ever did was I gave them a basin of warm water to set the plasma that they used to to shape the body back.
Right, right. So, okay. So then did they dress the president's body at Bethesda or no?
Oh yeah, yeah. They did the embalming in the same and sewed up the wounds and stuff on the same table that we did the autopsy on. And once
Right.
they finished that, they washed the body and moved it to the second autopsy table, and then the one of the morticians did all the cosmetic work and finished that. Had to put a stitch in the eyelid of the right eye to keep it, to keep it closed to the point that it matched the other eye. But other than that, there wasn't much of anything that was done to the face. The body, they used a kind of a plastic dam or something to cover the hole in the back of the head where there was no bone and the scalp wouldn't cover it. But and they used the mortician, the little wound that was first described in the right temple. It was small enough. He just put some what do you call mortician's wax over that.
Right. Right. So they must have had. No, go ahead, Jim.
Paul and I helped the mortician dress the body. It was, a full dress. They did normally Paul or they told me that they split the coat, but we didn't. We did a full dress, and even to the extent of garters for the socks and shoes.
Right.
So,
right. So
and
go ahead. They just wondering. Did President Kennedy, after the morticians had done their work and the cosmetic related issues, they dealt with those. Did he look presentable to the point where you could almost look at him and say, "Hey,
yeah,
didn't notice?"
no, to me, he looked normal. Of course, he looked normal. What they did was that they took the wound in the area in the back of the head, and they put it in the pillow, and it wasn't visible. There was no indication that there was a major wound anywhere. The face and so forth looked like a normal individual.
They could have. If they had decided to, they could have had an open casket, couldn't they?
Sure. It didn't. There was no reason not to. It wasn't like he was disfigured or anything.
Right.
I don't know what that decision was made. I talked. I had a good friend that was one of the pallbearers, and he told me that that night when they took put the body, I took the body back to the White House. I guess he was one of the pallbearers that was there in honor of the honor guard, and he said that Miss Kennedy came in. They opened the casket, and the honor guard turned their back. But that was all I ever heard about.
Right. So then I guess Gullers brought in a different casket, the final casket that was used for burial, correct? They had it at Bethesda?
Yeah, they did. What they did was they brought a casket in about midnight, I guess, or a little after that, that they had brought from Gullers funeral home, and it was a huge ornate mahogany casket that it weighed a lot. The 6 honor guard people had a hard time carrying it. It was so heavy.
Yeah, in fact, I think that what Hugh told me, Hugh Clark, before he passed away, he said
Yeah.
that thing was incredibly heavy. He said, I think it was in the neighborhood of 1,200 pounds.
Yeah, he was telling me that he would tell me, he said, we had to have help. And then, I think the people who helped him was actually the lieutenant that was in charge of the honor guard. And then later on, when they moved it from the rotunda out to the caisson he said that they added 2 more.
To help out.
2 more, 2 more honor guard people to handle it. And he said even then it was really, really
It was
heavy.
like, I think each man had to be carrying like about 150, 175 pounds. Even I think it might even been 1,300 pounds, because apparently it was made out of a kind of an African mahogany or ebony, really dense, beautiful wood.
No, it was a mahogany casket, but it had a lot of ornate trim on it too. The corners had metal, and I'm not sure what that was made out of. Of course, it looked like it was gold, but I don't know that it was gold or brass or whatever.
Wow. So let me ask you a question, Jim. After that was done, you probably were, just curious. I mean, was that a traumatic experience? I mean, it had to have been, or that was just one more autopsy for you?
No, I didn't consider it to be a trauma. It was just, it was unusual and so forth, but it was, I found it was, I was just doing my job.
Of course.
And that was, and I certainly didn't make the decision to assist that. I just happened to fall lots to, that was my duty night.
Sure.
So
then after that, did you get any, or that night, did you receive any commands, instructions, prohibitions?
Oh yeah.
Notices?
Well, after the body left that morning, Paul and I were called to Captain Stover's office, and we were given orders not to discuss any of it. Given 2 sets of orders, one from the Department of Navy and one from the Department of Defense, and we were not to discuss anything with anybody concerning what we had seen or what we had done.
Yeah, sure. Right. Anything else that has come out that surprised you, that's remarkable? Either in 1963, 64, and the years that followed.
Well, of course, I never talked with anybody until the House Select Committee, because, well, quite frankly, after I got out of the service, I was concentrating on my education, and I really, at that point in time, I was kind of taking what I remembered from the autopsy and validating it with the coursework and the education that I was getting in anatomy and pathology, to make sure that what I actually saw was unusual and not something that I wasn't aware of. And then I did realize that the appearance of the brain and a lot of the things were unusual. The blood vessels I was trying to put the needles in, they had kind of shriveled up and had tried to close off because they were arteries, and that was normally what an artery does. Is it tries to close itself off. It's not really that successful too much, because because of heart pumping the blood through it. But and they shrivel up. As if you cut an artery, it retracts a little bit because it's muscular, and those were that way. I noticed that the brain stem, which we normally would sever and take the brain out, looked like it was cut from two different sides. It's kind of like when you try to cut something from one side part way and then finish it from the other. One side's always a little bit higher than the other one. And those were the things that I noticed about that.
Right, just a kind of a final detail. I mean, what happened to the sheets? Did they just take them and burn them, or what? Did they go to the National Archive, or were they buried with the body?
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on that.
I said the sheets that President Kennedy's body was wrapped in Dallas. Were they just discarded?
Yeah. When Dr. Humes took it off the head, they were bloody and so forth, and he kind of threw them up over against the wall. And I remember that distinctly because I thought at that time, we're going to have to clean that up. And there was a dirty, what we call a dirty waste bucket, sitting underneath the head of the table. I don't know why he didn't do that. It may have just been the fact is that he needed to get them out of the way.
Right, sure.
But they would have been put into into what we call the dirty linen room. There were two hampers in there. One of them was for dirty linen that could be washed, like the sheet that was over the body, and the other one was contaminated linen that would have been put in the incinerator, and that would have been the blood-soaked stuff from the head.
Right. Okay, but just curious, when the body arrived, was it completely naked, so apart from the sheets, or was it partially clothed and JFK's clothes, or what?
No, there was no clothing on it.
Okay. Sure,
under the sheets, there was no clothing.
Okay. Right. Okay. So they've done that. They wrapped him. They removed his clothing and wrapped him up, and then put him into the casket, the O'Neill casket, I think, and put him on the plane
In Parkland. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And at no time there was no communication between Parkland and Bethesda during the autopsy?
Not during the autopsy, because there was only one phone in there, and that would have been something that either Paul or I would have had to have taken the phone to the table.
Right. Okay. Wow. Amazing day. Okay. Well, Jim, listen, your book again, At the Cold Shoulder of History, the chilling story of a 21-year-old Navy hospital corpsman who stood at the shoulder of JFK during the Bethesda autopsy. Jim, that's Jim Jenkins, the author. Thanks so much, Jim, for being on Quorum Radio again. Much obliged, and hopefully we'll be able to talk with you again.